Hey, what's up, Liron here, just chilling with my friend, Liron. But in any case, this is a big watercolor painting I painted, and if you're trying to paint big watercolors, if you're struggling with them, in this video I'm going to give you 10 tips for dealing with that, okay? It's not easy at first, but you can do this. So before we get to the tips from my list, let's get to some of the common challenges, okay? So bigger painting means bigger washes, larger shapes to paint, more preparation, more time, harder to maintain flow, right? It's very hard to maintain flow along these large washes, and you see me having trouble with it in many cases. Another issue that you may run into is getting an accurate drawing, projecting it onto a big piece of paper like that. It's not easy. And lastly, I will say, when it comes to seeing the overall picture and really making sure it works together, compositionally, whatever, it's much harder and it takes a bit of getting used to. With that said, I'm super happy about this one. If you take a few steps back, it almost looks like a picture, so it is quite realistic. But in any case, enough about me. Let's get to the 10 tips. We'll start with number 1. Start with easy subjects. Now, this is just general good advice, okay? If you start with simple subjects, you're gonna have an easier time. But there's another aspect to this. In this particular case, I would go for scenes that are more ideal for watercolor. And what does that mean? That means a lot of light, direct sunlight if possible, that creates a lot of small shapes of shadow, okay? So this is like the worst example for this kind of a thing, because everything is a shadow but a few small areas. You want to go the other way around. Don't have that kind of a thing, and don't even, sometimes painting against the light has that same effect, right? I would actually go for direct scenes that are directly hit by sunlight and create big areas of light. And then you can play around with smaller shapes of shadow. It just makes it a lot easier. Now, I will put another extra tidbit in there. If you can start black and white, that's better. It's easier, you don't have to think about color, but start with easy, simple subjects. Tip number 2, for drawing. Okay, 2 main ways of getting an accurate drawing here. Number 1 is a grid, which I used a lot for large paintings. The advantage of the grid method, and I do have a few videos on that, is that you can basically project any size photo onto any size plane, right? All you have to do is draw the cubes, the grid on the photo, which Photoshop can do, other softwares can do, and then draw that same identical grid over the paper. And it doesn't matter the size, you can always do this. Now, there are some challenges to that as well. So another way of doing it is tracing, because the grid method can be very tedious. Tracing can work well for you. Now, one way of doing this is to either put the painting on your computer screen, turn up the brightness all the way, and work in sections. But that's tricky because you don't know exactly how big you should open the photo and how much you should zoom in on that. So another method, if you have a big enough of a TV, I'm pointing to our TV here, I actually connected my computer to the TV, turned off all the lights in the room, and just taped it over the screen and traced the whole thing. Okay, now tracing isn't easy as well. Sometimes it's hard to see. I like to trace like a basic structure and then fill in the details, right? But do whatever it takes to get an accurate drawing in there, either the grid or the tracing method. I will link, if I believe I have a video on the topic, I'll try and link it somewhere here. Next up, number 3, tip number 3, big palette, big mixing area, big brush, big bucket, big pans, big everything. You're painting large, which means you need to use more paint, more water, and for that it's best if you use a bigger palette with a big mixing area, big wells, not necessarily pans, definitely not half pans, but like a big area where you can squeeze out the paint directly from the tube. That's more recommended. Use a big brush. Now, big brush means it has bigger water capacity, so you'll need a lot of water. Again, that's a big challenge right there, and you're gonna spend more time mixing, more time, more than you think, a lot more, okay? So, which brings me to my next tip. Mix a lot of paint in advance. When you're gonna paint this big of a wash, you need a lot of paint. Even for this, being such a dark wash, you need a lot of paint. So you'll spend a lot of time mixing. Now, I will give you one extra tip I just learned in the last 2 or 3 processes. If you really need a big quantity of paint, use a small cup, like a plastic cup or whatever. I like the hot drink type of cup. Fill it in with a bit of water and squeeze paint out of the tube directly and mix it there. Prepare a huge batch of paint. Now, you're gonna be surprised because you're gonna put a small amount of water and you'll still, if you want to get a dark value, you'll need a lot of paint out of the tube. You'll feel like you're squeezing a ton and mixing. It's still not gonna be strong enough because the water to paint ratio, we're so used to bringing a little water, adding a bit of paint. It's not gonna work the same way for very big washes. You will need a big batch of water and paint, a lot of it. So play around with it, experiment with it. Some people like to use a cut out bottom part of a bottle, which is transparent so you can see through it, and then you add a bit of paint, you mix it with a bit of water, add more, especially for these big dark washes, right? Which I told you to avoid, but just saying. So that's kind of a big tip for me. Use a cup or a cut out bottom of a bottle and mix there. Okay, one more thing I forgot to mention previously, big bucket for mixing. Otherwise the water is going to get contaminated immediately if it's a small cup. You need a big bucket for mixing. I like to use the Magella. I'll try and link it somewhere here if I remember. Now, tip number 5. It is okay to work in small patches. It's okay if you decide I'm going to paint this small area and then this small area and this part of the leg and this part of the arm. You don't have to merge everything together because it's very hard with these big paintings. The one thing I want you to be aware of is the risk. If you're painting in small areas, you run the risk of having a more fragmented feeling painting, right? Less togetherness, less wholeness. So just have that in mind. But it is okay to work in small patches, especially for the more challenging areas. Tip number 6, have the paper at an angle. And I'm gonna add to it, okay? Sometimes you'll need a serious angle there because you're trying to help the paint move in a big wash, okay? So have that in mind, right? This may not be enough, you may need more. But one thing to pay attention to is you may get leaks. If you use a lot of water, the paint may leak, so just be careful when it comes to that, okay? Next up, tip number 7. You don't have to paint the paper, and in fact, it may be beneficial to not tape it. So what do we mean by that? Usually I'll tape the painting all around it and it gets you a nice white border that you can use instead of adding matting or anything like that. Now, with big paintings, the one issue I had is it was hard for me to find a big enough surface where I can fit the whole painting. Even my work desk is not big enough for it to go this way. It's big enough for it to go like that, and I have no room for my palette, my bucket, nothing. I need to put it on an extra bench, right? So one thing you can do is just simply don't tape. And it's okay. I didn't tape this, it didn't buckle too much, okay? I can show you right here, it's okay. Because it's a big enough piece of paper, it's gonna be all right, even if, let me arrange this, even if you're not taping it. Okay, just have that in mind. It will buckle throughout, that's fine, don't worry. Let it dry, maybe use a hairdryer, it will start to flatten, trust me. The advantage of not taping it is that you can play around with the angle, so you can pick it up, move it around a bit, you're not constrained to another surface. And usually I'll tape to a board, like a wooden board. Can't have that now because I don't have a board that's big enough, okay? So just don't tape. It's okay, don't worry about it. Now, tip number 8, multiple glazes over thick layers. You know me, I like to go directly with the darkness. I like to go with the thickest paint possible immediately and just get it done as fewer washes as I can. This is not the case with these big paintings. Why? Because if you're gonna try and do a big wash that's dark, you're gonna have a hell of a time because you won't be able to maintain any wash. Now, it's not impossible, and if you mix enough, large enough of a quantity of thick paint, which is very hard to do, you could do this, right? But I would say err on the side of thinner washes and get the flow going and get it in a few glazes. Now, this means to get it this dark, you'll probably need 4 to 5, even 6 layers. Just be prepared, okay? If you push it to be as dark as you can but still flow, you still will need 3 or 4 washes, not even for the dark areas, but for the kind of mid to dark values. Okay, so just have that in mind. Tip number 9, take a break. Take a few steps back. Allow yourself to take in the full picture. Why? Because remember what I said, that's one of the challenges when painting this size. It's very hard to really see the full picture, the full composition, and really gauge whether it's good or not. For example, a high-level compositional thing would be to keep a clear focal point, right? So here I have pretty much two very clear focal points, which is this area of me sketching in my sketchbook and this area of my face in the car. This is a high contrast point, this is a high contrast point. It's also, in terms of the idea, the focal point, because that's the action I'm doing here, right? I'm sketching, which is really cool. And I thought maybe next painting I should paint myself painting myself sketching, but never mind, forget about that for now. So here's the thing. To have a clear focal point, you need to know how to balance the shapes, the values, the colors, all of that. So, for example, this here, my jeans here should be as dark as this. But I knew that if I'm gonna darken this, it's gonna close this thing off and it's gonna look awkward. So I'd much rather kind of let it blend into the edges, right? Here you don't have as much edges, it's the side, right? This is a bit of a detail, but you don't have a lot of hard edges. It's very smooth kind of, right? Now, same goes for this corner. I kind of let it do its thing. So these are things that are very hard to, like here, high contrast in temperature and colors, stronger saturated colors, strong red, strong blue, right? It can be very challenging to see, like I can see it here, if I look at it, directly I could see it, but if I really try and figure out, does it work in the context of the full thing, that's more challenging. So take your time and take a break even, take a few steps back, come back after a few hours, maybe the next day, and really look at it and ask yourself, what's off here? Is the balance working? Does it look good? Etc, etc. Okay? Tip number 10, which is relevant to pretty much every painting. Trust the process. Okay? What do I mean by that? If you know you're doing your best to get the accurate shapes, accurate values, accurate colors, and you work section by section or wash by wash, trust the process and see it all the way through. Instead of worrying of whether am I getting to the result I have predetermined in my mind to be the best one, and having all these thoughts about the end result, which is great, you know, you need to have a goal, you need to have something encouraging you. But instead of going about that, focus on what you're doing at the moment, what's in your control. This shape right now is in my control. So I'm gonna do the best to get it as accurately as I can. And I really messed up this area of the arms here, but because I did a few washes, I got it to be dark enough. The colors are a mess, but I still did my best, right? The shape is accurate because I traced the drawing. I got it to be decent enough so that when you take a few steps back, it actually makes sense, right? So really try and instill that thing in you, trusting the process, painting it, following what you know works all the way till the end, and let's judge it when you think it's done, right? Most of the paintings you send me aren't done because you didn't go dark enough, not because you messed up something that you cannot correct. People will send me paintings that are extremely light, they don't have the contrast necessary, they look way off, just because you could go over everything and darken it more. So nothing is lost, right? Judge the painting when it's done and then decide maybe it's not done and rework it, but trust the process, let it take you all the way to the end of the painting and let's judge it then, okay? So I hope that helps. This is, by the way, a full sheet size of Saunders Waterford cold press paper. I used a mix of paints, but mostly Daniel Smith. And it's been great fun. This has been great fun to work on. I hope you'll give it a try. I hope you'll try a big watercolor. I will say one advantage of big watercolors is small mistakes are less meaningful or meaningless or more obsolete. Why? Because you have a big thing to relate to, right? When you paint small, every small mistake you make, every small shape that's off, it's going to be noticeable more because it's a smaller piece of paper, so the margin of error is lower. Here you have a higher margin of error, funny enough, and you can do a lot of beautiful stuff with it. So thank you so much for watching. If you want to learn how to paint like me, how to let go, how to enjoy the painting process, be sure to check out the frustration-free watercolor course. Link is always in the description box below. Now, if you want to learn how to paint realistically, and you're kind of at an intermediate to advanced level, check out the Watercolor Realism course. I will put a link to in the description box as well. So that's kind of, if you're a little more advanced, if you got a hold of the basics, you just want to get that realism done. I'm going to show you how to get that realistic result every single time. Okay, there's some things you can do, some best practices you can follow, some photo manipulations, and some different work processes that will always get you a realistic result, and then you can work in making it more graceful, making it flow more, playing around with how detailed you go, right? You have a lot of freedom in that regard. But I do want to thank you so much to anyone who got my courses. Actually, a lot of people have gotten the frustration-free watercolor course, but did not get the watercolor realism course. Now, the frustration-free watercolor course is like 29 bucks. The watercolor realism course is 24 bucks. So for 24 bucks, you get the entire method of how to paint realistically, and you can go ahead and paint a realistic painting tomorrow. Okay? So I do want to encourage you to get that. You can do this. It's all the magic, all the secrets, and the values in the shapes, and a bit in the colors, and the edges as well, which is something I talk about there a lot. So with that, we'll wrap it up. I want to thank you so much once again. Leave a comment, let me know your thoughts, subscribe if you still aren't, and we'll see you in the next video.